Much of the time when we listen to music or perform it, we do it without thinking much or even at all about how exactly the music is made, how it's put together. But sometimes there are reasons for wanting, even needing, to know something about such things. These reasons vary, and because of that, different people find themselves focusing on different parts of the larger picture. But almost everybody looking for knowledge about the nuts and bolts of music is going to have to learn certain basics. And those basics are what this series of videos is all about. We're going to start with something called the major scale. This is just the familiar do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do that every grade schooler knows. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, ti, la, sol, fa, mi, re, do. Why is this called a scale? Answer: the word scale is from the Latin word meaning ladder. And the notes of the scale can be thought of as like the rungs of a ladder that take you in a series of small steps from the bottom do to the top one, or vice versa. Why is it called major? I'm going to put that question off for a while, but I promise you that you'll have an answer before we're done. I want now to call your attention to the fact that the bottom and the top notes of the scale have the same name, do. And the distance, so to speak, between those two notes, the lower and the upper do, is called an octave. Why? Because oct means 8, as in oct, octagon, and octopus. And it takes 8 notes to get from the bottom of the scale to the top. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Once you've gone through the scale from bottom to top, or vice versa, in other words, once you've traversed an octave, the scale starts all over again. Here it is in one octave, and here it is in the next octave. Now, the octave has a very curious quality. Its top and bottom notes are clearly different. One is higher, one is lower. And yet, in every other way, they're perceived as being the same. For example, there's no sense of harmony when you play the top and bottom notes of the octave together. That lack of harmony gives a sparseness to the octave that's very distinctive, a hollow kind of sound that can produce an eerie, ghostly effect, kind of like a dancing skeleton. Here now is a familiar tune that uses all the notes of the major scale except for the lower do. But since it does have the upper do in it, there's an obvious sense in which it incorporates the entire scale. Sol, la, sol, mi, do, la, sol, sol, la, sol, la, sol, do, ti, fa, sol, fa, re, ti, la, sol, sol, la, sol, la, sol, la, mi. The scale I've been playing up to this point starts on the note which you get by fingering the 5th string at the 3rd fret, a note which is what musicians call C. But you can start a scale on any note. Here it is again, starting on C. But suppose that instead of starting on that note, I start on the one that you get by fingering the 6th string at the 3rd fret, the one called G. That too is a major scale. Now suppose I start on the open 4th string, a note called D. That's a major scale. Now I picked C, G, and D to illustrate just because on the guitar it's particularly easy to play major scales starting on those notes. But in principle, and in fact, if you're a really good guitarist, you can start a major scale on any note you want. If I start a major scale on a given note, say C, that is, if I take C as my do, then the scale is said to be in the key named by that note. In this case, C major. And C is accordingly called the key note of the scale. By the same token, if I take G as do, then the scale is in the key of G major, and G is the key note. Likewise, if I start the scale on D or any other note. So let's ask a question. What do all of these have in common? What makes each of them a major scale? To show you, I'm going to play the entire C major scale on just one string of the guitar, like this. Now let me do it for you again, and as I do it, watch how I move on the fretboard. To get from Do to Re, I move up 2 frets. To get from Re to Mi, I move up 2 more frets. To get from Mi to Fa, I just go up 1 fret. To get from Fa to Sol, I go up 2 frets. From Sol to La, 2 more frets. From La to Ti, 2 frets. And then from Ti to the upper Do, just 1 fret. So here's the formula for a major scale on a single string. Adjacent notes in the major scale are 2 frets apart, except for Mi and Fa and Ti and upper Do, which are both just 1 fret apart. So if I play a scale on just one string, no matter where I start, as long as I follow this formula, I'm going to get a major scale. For example, here's what happens if I take G as my Do. And if I take D as my Do, which involves starting on an open string, the formula is the same. Now, a guitarist wouldn't usually play the scale on just one string, but no matter how you play it, regardless of what strings and frets you use, even what instrument you're playing on, the various pitches in the major scale relate to each other in exactly the way they do when you follow the formula I've just shown you for playing the scale on one string of the guitar. Now let me go back for a moment to Rudolph. When I first played it for you, I took C as my Do, so I was playing the song in the key of C major. But I can play the song in any key I want. For example, here it is in G major. And here it is in D major. Now, what's the point of all these different possibilities? One part of the answer is obvious. If you want to sing a melody, then depending on what kind of voice you have, soprano, alto, tenor, whatever, it's going to be easier in some keys than in others. For example, G major is a very comfortable key for me to sing Rudolph in. Not too high, not too low. Rudolph the red-nosed reindeer had a very shiny nose, and if you ever saw it, you can even say it glows. And while I can manage it in C major, it's not as comfortable. It's a little on the high side for me, though in some ways it sounds better. Rudolph the red-nosed reindeer had a very shiny nose, and if you ever saw it, you would even say it glows. And to do it in D major is even more of a stretch. Rudolph the red-nosed reindeer had a very shiny nose, and if you ever saw it, you would even say it glows. Now I'm ready to deliver on a promise I made earlier and explain what the term major means. As you probably already know, in our musical tradition, there's also something called minor. Before I explain exactly what the difference is, here's an example of a familiar song in minor that many of us sang as kids. Oh, they don't wear pants in the southern part of France. La da 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 da. You'll notice that this has quite a different feel to it, sort of exotic, maybe even a little Middle Eastern sounding. So what's going on here? The answer is that in minor as opposed to major, the third and sixth notes of the scale are one notch or fret lower than in major. So if I play the first three notes of the major scale, 1, 2, 3, the first three notes in minor are like this, 1, 2, 3. The difference is that the third note of the scale is one fret lower than it is in major. 1, 2, 3, there it is in major. 1, 2, 3, there it is in minor, one fret lower. Notice that in the minor, as I'm playing it, I finger the fourth string on the first fret rather than on the second, as I would in major. So here's major. There's the third note, fingered on the second fret. Here's minor, the third note, fingered on the first fret. The sixth note of the scale works exactly the same way. You finger the string one fret lower than you would if you were playing in major. So here is 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5, 6, that's major. 5, 6. 5, 6, that's minor. 5, 6. Again, there I'm on the second fret. 5, 6 in major. 5, 6 in minor. There I'm on the first fret, one fret lower. So why the terms major and minor? These are among the many words in English that, like scale, we've taken from Latin, where they mean bigger and smaller. Think, for example, about the difference between major and minor league baseball, and the fact that we call the major leagues the big leagues. In music, the idea is that in a minor scale, the distance between the second and third notes is a little less than it is in major, just one fret rather than two. Likewise, the distance between the fifth and sixth notes in minor is also a little bit less than it is in major. And you can see that very clearly on the guitar. So once again, here's the difference. The third and sixth notes in minor are one fret lower than in major. In our musical tradition, we think of major as the plain vanilla alternative, and minor as more like one of those fancy Ben & Jerry's flavors. For this reason, when we identify a major key by the name of its keynote, we often leave off the word major. So if I say in the key of C, it's understood that I mean in the key of C major. If I want to refer to C minor, then I have to say C minor. That concludes the introduction to scales. You might want to watch this part again before moving on, and I'll see you again in part 2.